106 people dead, 400,000 homes still without power, and a second monster storm is already forming off the coast. If you think winter storms are just about snow and inconvenience, what's happening right now across the United States will completely shatter that illusion. Because Winter Storm Fern didn't just dump snow, it rewrote the rules of what winter weather can do to an entire nation. Picture this: a single storm system so massive it touches nearly every state from New Mexico to Maine. Highways turned into frozen death traps, airports paralyzed with over 20,000 cancelled flights. Entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness for days as temperatures plunged to -43 degrees Fahrenheit. And while rescue teams are still searching for victims, meteorologists are tracking something even more terrifying: a new nor'easter rapidly intensifying into what they're calling a bomb cyclone, ready to slam the same battered regions with another 12 inches of snow and 60-mile-per-hour winds. Here's what's keeping emergency managers awake at night. This isn't just bad weather. This is a cascading infrastructure failure that exposed every weak point in America's power grid, transportation network, and emergency response systems. And the human cost? Some counts put the death toll above 100, but officials warn that number could climb higher as delayed reports trickle in from rural counties still cut off from the outside world. So what made Winter Storm Fern so catastrophically different from every other winter storm? And why are scientists saying this could be the new normal? The answers begin with something that should have been impossible. Winter storms are nothing new to the United States. Every year, nor'easters batter New England, lake-effect snow buries the Great Lakes, and ice storms occasionally cripple parts of the South. The National Weather Service has decades of data showing the expected patterns. Most major winter storms hit regional zones. They might shut down a city or two, disrupt travel for a few days, maybe knock out power to tens of thousands. That's the baseline. That's what communities prepare for. But Winter Storm Fern defied every one of those patterns. This wasn't a regional event. This was a continent-spanning monster that formed around January 22nd and slowly intensified into a system with winds near 70 miles per hour and central pressure dropping toward 962 hectopascals. Instead of targeting one area, Fern spread its reach across an entire nation-sized swath of land. From the high deserts of New Mexico and West Texas, across the plains, through the Ohio Valley and the Deep South, all the way to the major cities of the East Coast and into New England. Satellite images from NASA on January 26th showed something forecasters had rarely seen: a bright white band of snow stretching from the southwestern United States all the way to the northeastern tip of the country. The storm's footprint was so massive that it essentially created winter chaos everywhere at once. In the mountains near Bonito Lake in New Mexico, snow totals reached about 31 inches, and in parts of the south, ice built up to about 1 inch thick on trees and power lines, heavy enough to snap utility poles like matchsticks and bring down entire sections of the grid. In Arkansas, sleet piled up over 6 inches in Little Rock, breaking daily snowfall records that had stood since 1899. And far to the north, in Seagull, Minnesota, temperatures plunged toward -43 degrees Fahrenheit, turning any power outage into a direct threat to life. By the time the core of Fern began to weaken around January 27th, it had already touched nearly every layer of daily life for tens of millions of people. But the scale of this disaster only becomes clear when you follow what happened next. Hour by hour, as the storm rolled from west to east, across the country. In the days before the first flakes fell, this storm was already on the maps. Forecasters with the National Weather Service began issuing winter storm watches and warnings as Fern took shape, stretching a long corridor of alerts from the southwest toward the Ohio Valley and the East Coast. Governors declared states of emergency. Road crews pre-treated highways with salt and brine, and families rushed to grocery stores to buy food, water, and fuel, knowing they might be stuck at home for days. Then the snow and ice arrived. In New Mexico and parts of West Texas, Fern first showed its strength, with deep powdery snow, piling up toward 30 inches near places like Bonito Lake. As the storm shifted east into Texas and Oklahoma, the snow mixed with ice, turning interstates into slick, invisible traps. Authorities reported multiple crashes, dozens of vehicles sliding off elevated ramps, and at least a few weather-related deaths, linked to traffic accidents, exposure, and people venturing out on frozen lakes and rivers without realizing how thin the ice had become. By January 24th and 25th, the heart of the storm was pounding across the Mid-South and the Ohio Valley. Little Rock in Arkansas saw more than 6 inches of sleet and snow in a single day, breaking that snowfall record that had stood since 1899. Across Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio, bands of snow and sleet stacked up from 6 to 13 inches, with a crust of ice up to nearly 1 inch thick in parts of Kentucky. Trees snapped, poles cracked, and power lines fell under the weight, pushing nationwide outages past 1 million customers at the peak, according to utility reports. As Fern curved toward the East Coast, the focus shifted to the big cities. Washington, D.C. picked up almost 7 inches of snow. Philadelphia climbed above 9 inches in one day, its heaviest daily snowfall since the big blizzard of 2016. In Boston and parts of New England, totals exceeded 20 inches, shutting schools, slowing trains, and forcing thousands of flight cancellations. And even when the last snow band finally moved offshore, the real cost of Fern was only beginning to emerge, measured not in inches, but in lives and days without power. When you look at the human toll of Winter Storm Fern, the numbers do not line up neatly. Different agencies and newsrooms are counting in different ways and on different timelines. A recent compiled tally based on state and local reports now lists around 106 people who lost their lives in connection with Fern and the brutal cold that followed. Other major news outlets, including national and international papers, are still using phrases like dozens confirmed dead, with figures ranging from the mid-40s to at least 60 weather-related deaths. Behind those numbers are stories that repeat from state to state. In Tennessee, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Mississippi, officials describe patients dying of hypothermia in unheated homes or after being stranded outside when vehicles slid off icy roads. Medical examiners are reporting cases of carbon monoxide poisoning as families ran generators or grills indoors to keep warm during long outages. The fumes, invisible and odorless, filled bedrooms and living rooms while people slept, killing them in their own homes. In Texas, Arkansas, and other southern states not used to this kind of ice, drivers were killed in chain reaction crashes on frozen interstates or after losing control on rural bridges that turned into sheets of ice with no warning. In New York and across the Northeast, authorities link deaths to people collapsing while shoveling heavy wet snow, to multi-vehicle pile-ups in whiteout conditions, and to residents who could not reach medical care in time because side streets were still blocked days after the storm passed. Campus journalists, in one detailed report, counted at least 44 deaths across 13 states as of January 28th, while warning that late reports from rural counties and small towns could push the total higher. Everyone agrees on one point. This was not a storm that people simply waited out indoors. It was a system that reached into homes, cars, and workplaces, and in many cases, it did not give people a second chance. But here's what makes this crisis even more dangerous. Even as skies clear over much of the country, the threat has not passed. Hundreds of thousands of customers are still without power, especially across Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, Louisiana, and parts of the Northeast. Nighttime temperatures in some of these areas are still dropping well below freezing, turning every hour without heat into a medical risk for elderly residents, young children, and anyone with chronic illness. Downed trees and power poles have left neighborhoods in the dark for days, and utility crews are warning that in the hardest-hit pockets, full restoration could take several more days. Here's the important part. While communities are still dealing with those outages, forecasters are tracking a new winter system just off the East Coast. A developing nor'easter with the potential to rapidly intensify into what meteorologists call a bomb cyclone is expected to move toward the Carolinas, Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic, and New England in the coming days. Early projections from national outlets suggest up to 12 inches of new snow in some coastal zones, with wind gusts that could reach 60 miles per hour, enough to create blizzard-like conditions if heavy snow and low visibility line up at the same time along the shoreline. That combination of wind and low pressure could push water inland, raising the risk of coastal flooding when high tide arrives. For cities and towns from the Outer Banks to Maine, the concern is not just another snow event, but the impact on an already stressed landscape. Roofs are still carrying the weight of the last storm. Trees and branches are weakened, and power lines are exposed. A second round of heavy wet snow and strong wind on top of that could trigger new outages, fresh damage, and another round of dangerous travel conditions just as people are trying to return to work and school. This is where it gets even more complex, because the damage from Fern isn't just about the weather. It's about how the entire infrastructure of the United States responded when pushed to its limits. Across the regions hit hardest by Winter Storm Fern, the response effort is now in a long, grinding recovery phase. Utility companies have brought nationwide outages down from a peak of more than 1 million customers to around 400,000 still without power. But progress is uneven. In Tennessee, local stations in Nashville report close to 99,000 customers still in the dark after what some utilities describe as their worst ice event in decades. In Mississippi, Entergy says tens of thousands remain without power, even after restoring service to more than 120,000 accounts over the course of the storm. Crews are working around the clock, but some rural pockets are being told to prepare for several more days without electricity. The reason? Ice-coated trees brought down not just individual power lines, but entire sections of transmission infrastructure. In some cases, utility poles snapped at the base, taking transformers and backup systems with them. On the transportation side, airlines and highway departments are trying to dig out from one of the most disruptive winter events since the height of the COVID era. Analysts estimate that around 20,000 flights were cancelled over the peak days of Fern, with at least 10,000 of those involving American Airlines alone. On January 28th, American cancelled more than 400 flights, roughly 15 to 16% of its daily schedule. as it tried to rebuild operations at major hubs like Dallas-Fort Worth, Charlotte, and Philadelphia. The airline now faces an estimated $150 to $200 million in weather-related losses, while passengers continue to deal with multi-day delays and missed connections on both domestic and international routes. Some travelers have been stranded in airports for nearly a week, sleeping on terminal floors, unable to reach their destinations or return home. On the ground, snow plows and salt trucks are still clearing secondary roads and residential streets from the Mid-South to New England. Some school districts, especially in parts of North Carolina, Kentucky, and Virginia, have extended remote learning because buses cannot safely reach many neighborhoods and pockets of outages remain. Federal offices in Washington and local governments in several states are operating on limited schedules or with reduced in-person staffing. Emergency managers say the next few days will be critical as they try to restore power, reopen schools and public buildings, and stabilize transport networks before the next coastal storm arrives. But the deeper question looming over all of this is whether the United States is fundamentally prepared for what winter weather is becoming. In the weeks and months ahead, Winter Storm Fern is likely to be remembered as more than just another winter storm. Forecasters, emergency managers, and policymakers are already filing it under the label historic because of the way it combined heavy snow, crippling ice, deep cold, and long-lasting damage across such a wide area. It exposed weak points that officials have warned about for years. Power grids that struggle under the weight of ice and wind. In some regions, the infrastructure was built decades ago when winter storms were less frequent and less severe. Wooden utility poles, above-ground power lines, and aging transformers simply cannot handle the stress of sustained ice accumulation. When one section fails, it triggers a cascade effect, pulling down neighboring lines and overloading backup systems. Transportation networks that cannot cope when a single hub shuts down. The airline industry operates on razor-thin margins, with planes and crews constantly moving between cities. When a major airport like Dallas-Fort Worth or Charlotte goes dark for even a few hours, the ripple effects spread across the entire national network. Cancelled flights pile up, crews run out of legal working hours, and passengers are left stranded with no clear answers. Communities in both the South and the North that are still not fully prepared for days without electricity and heat. In southern states, where severe winter weather is rare, many homes lack proper insulation or backup heating systems. When the power goes out and temperatures drop, people are left with few options. Some turn to dangerous improvised heating methods like running generators indoors or burning charcoal in enclosed spaces, leading to the carbon monoxide poisoning deaths that medical examiners are still tallying. At the same time, scientists and climate analysts are careful with their language. No single storm can be blamed entirely on climate change, but Fern fits into a pattern that experts say is becoming more familiar. More frequent extreme events, stronger contrasts between warm and cold air masses, heavier bursts of snow and rain when storms do form. For cities from Dallas to New York, that means winter planning can no longer be based only on the averages of past decades. It has to account for rarer but more severe events that push systems close to their limits. The old playbook, the one that said southern cities might see a serious ice storm once every 10 or 15 years, is being rewritten in real time. Fern is also prompting questions about investment. How much should be spent to harden power lines or bury cables underground where ice cannot reach them? How to upgrade drainage, road design, and snow removal fleets in regions that historically did not need heavy equipment. How to improve public warning systems so that people understand not just that a storm is coming, but what long outages and dangerous cold will actually feel like in their own homes. Just as important, how to protect the most vulnerable residents who have the fewest resources to ride out days of disruption. Elderly people living alone, families in poorly insulated housing, people with medical conditions that require electricity for oxygen concentrators or refrigerated medications. For them, a multi-day outage is not an inconvenience. It is a life-threatening emergency. The answers will shape not only how the United States remembers Fern, but how ready it will be when the next historic winter storm appears on the map. And based on what meteorologists are seeing right now, that next storm might not be far off. As of today, the developing nor'easter off the East Coast is being monitored hour by hour. If it intensifies as expected, communities from North Carolina to Massachusetts could face blizzard conditions within days. Emergency managers are urging residents in the projected path to prepare now. Stock up on essentials, charge devices, check on neighbors, and be ready to shelter in place if conditions deteriorate rapidly. For the millions still recovering from Fern, the prospect of another major storm is almost too much to process. Some neighborhoods are still digging out from the first round of snow. Power crews are working through the night to restore service, and now they are being told to brace for another hit. In the end, the story of Winter Storm Fern is not just a list of numbers. It is a reminder of how quickly normal life can break down when weather, infrastructure, and preparation all collide. A single storm over a span of a few days managed to shut schools from the South to New England, cancel thousands of flights, darken hundreds of thousands of homes, and leave a death toll that will take weeks, maybe months, to fully understand. For millions of people, Fern will be remembered not as a headline, but as the week when the lights went out and the cold came in. The week when neighbors knocked on doors to check if anyone needed help. The week when families huddled together under blankets, waiting for the power to return. The week when emergency rooms filled with hypothermia cases and carbon monoxide victims. And the week when the reality of what extreme winter weather can do became impossible to ignore. For those now looking ahead, the message is simple. Pay attention to official forecasts and warnings. Have a plan for what you will do if the power fails, the roads close, or a second storm follows close behind the first. Check on neighbors who might not be able to manage on their own, especially elderly residents, people with disabilities, or families with young children. And as communities and leaders debate how to rebuild, the choices they make will decide how resilient towns and cities will be when the next extreme winter system appears. Because based on everything scientists are seeing, this will not be the last time a storm like Fern tests the limits of what the United States can handle. If you have lived through the storm, your experience matters. What you saw, what worked, and what failed will help shape how all of us prepare for the next one. The question is not whether another winter storm Fern will happen. The question is when, and whether we will be ready.